Grace, it's been more than 5 years since you married my son. Why haven't you given us a grandchild? We are getting worried. Grace's heart beat fast. She didn't know what to say. She wanted to tell them the truth, but she also wanted to protect her husband. Grace lived in Asaba, a lively town full of friendly people. She worked at a small company where she helped with keeping records. Grace was kind, cheerful, and always willing to help others. One sunny afternoon, she went to a business meeting arranged by her boss. She dressed with white shoes, ready to learn new things. At the event, many people gathered, talking and sharing ideas. That was when she met Chinonso, a tall, quiet man from Nnewi. Chinonso had come to Asaba to grow his small business. He sold electronics and wanted to meet new people who could help him. When he saw Grace, something about her caught his attention. "Hello, I'm Chinonso," he said with a soft word. Stretching out his hand, Grace shook his hand warmly and replied, "Nice to meet you. I am Grace." They started talking, sharing stories about their lives, dreams, and goals. Grace told Chinonso about her love for reading, while Chinonso talked about his dream of opening a big electronics shop one day. They laughed a lot and found they enjoyed each other's company. After the meeting ended, Chinonso asked for Grace's phone number. "Can I call you sometime?" he asked shyly. Grace smiled and gave him her contact. That was how their friendship began. Days turned into weeks, and Grace and Chinonso kept in touch. They spoke often, met for lunch, and went on walks around the town. Their friendship grew, and soon they became very close. Chinonso admired how caring and hardworking Grace was. Grace liked how Chinonso treated her with respect and kindness. One evening, while walking by the beachside, Chinonso held Grace's hand and said, "I love spending time with you. You are special to me." Grace felt happy and replied, "I care about you too." That was the beginning of their love story. Months later, Chinonso asked Grace to marry him. "Will you be my wife?" he asked with a big smile. Grace felt tears in her eyes as she said yes. She knew she wanted to spend her life with someone like Chinonso, who made her feel valued. Their wedding was simple but beautiful. Friends, family, and neighbors came to celebrate with them. Grace wore a lovely white dress, while Chinonso looked smart in a black suit. Everyone danced, ate, and wished them a happy life together. After the wedding, they moved into a small apartment in Asaba. Their home was warm and full of love. They did many things together: cooking, cleaning, and watching movies. They dreamed of having children one day, but for now, they were just happy being with each other. Chinonso worked hard to grow his business. He woke up early each morning, went to the shop, and stayed late to attend to customers. Grace supported him by helping with the little things he needed. When Chinonso came home tired, Grace would prepare a delicious meal, and they would sit together to eat and talk about their day. Life seemed perfect for them. They loved each other deeply and believed nothing could ever go wrong. Grace's friends admired her relationship, and Chinonso's friends often said he was lucky to have a wife like Grace. As time went by, they started hoping for a baby. Grace dreamed of holding her child in her arms, while Chinonso imagined playing with their little one. But after a few years, they began to wonder why they had no child yet. At first, they didn't worry too much. They believed it would happen when the time was right. However, as months passed and nothing changed, Grace started feeling sad. Why haven't we had a baby yet? She asked herself quietly one night. Chinonso noticed her sadness and tried to comfort her. Don't worry, my love. Everything will be fine, he said, holding her hand. Despite Chinonso's comforting words, Grace couldn't help but feel anxious. She didn't want to disappoint her husband. She decided to be patient, hoping that soon they would have the child they longed for. Grace and Chinonso lived happily together in their small home in Asaba. Every morning, Grace woke up early to make breakfast. She liked to prepare yam and eggs or rice and stew. Chinonso always smiled when he saw the food. Thank you, my dear, he would say, kissing her on the forehead before leaving for work. At night, they would sit outside, talking about their dreams. Grace dreamed of having a baby. She would often say, one day, we will hear the sweet sound of a baby crying in this house. Chinonso smiled each time she said this. He also wanted children. But after 5 long years of marriage, they had no child. Grace started feeling sad. She wondered why she had not gotten pregnant. Many times, she sat alone, thinking quietly. She did not want to tell Chinonso about her worries because she didn't want to make him sad too. One day, Grace decided to visit her friend Adaeze. Adaeze was a kind woman who always gave good advice. When Grace arrived, Adaeze welcomed her warmly. Grace, you look worried. What is wrong? Adaeze asked, offering her a seat. Grace sighed deeply. It's been 5 long years, Adaeze. No child. I don't know what to do. I think something might be wrong with me, Grace said with tears in her eyes. Adaeze held Grace's hand gently. Don't cry, my friend. You're not alone. Many couples go through this. Have you seen a doctor? Adaeze asked softly. Grace shook her head. No, we haven't. I've been afraid. What if the doctor says something is wrong with me? She whispered. Adaeze smiled kindly. It's better to know what is wrong than to keep worrying. Go with Chinonso to the hospital. Everything might be fine. If not, the doctor can help. That evening, Grace talked to her husband Chinonso. Baby, I want us to see a doctor. It's been many years and I still haven't gotten pregnant. I need to know if something is wrong, she said quietly. Chinonso looked surprised but nodded slowly. Okay, my dear, if it will make you feel better, we will go. The next day, they visited the hospital. The doctor, a gentleman named Dr. Carlo, welcomed them into his office. He asked many questions about their health and did some tests. Come back in 2 days for the results, Dr. Carlo said with a smile. Those 2 days felt so long. Grace was nervous. She prayed quietly, hoping everything would be fine. Chinonso noticed her worry and tried to cheer her up. No matter what happens, I love you, Grace. You are my wife, and nothing will change that, he said kindly. Finally, the day came to get the results. They sat in the doctor's office, holding hands tightly. Dr. Carlo looked at them and smiled softly. Grace, you are healthy. There is no problem with you, he said gently. Grace felt a small relief, but she noticed the doctor's face looked serious as he turned to Chinonso. Chinonso, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your test shows you have a condition. It will be very hard for you to father a child naturally, Dr. Carlos said carefully. Chinonso's heart sank. He could not believe what he was hearing. Grace squeezed his hand tightly, giving him silent support. Dr. Carlo continued, "There are other ways to have children, like IVF, but it can be expensive." Grace thanked the doctor, and they left the hospital quietly. On their way home, Chinonso didn't say a word. He was lost in thought. Grace held his hand tightly, hoping to comfort him. When they got home, Chinonso sat down and said softly, "I'm sorry, Grace. I didn't know I was the problem. You deserve better." Grace knelt beside him and held his face. "Don't ever say that. I married you because I love you, not just to have children. We'll get through this together," she said firmly. Chinonso felt grateful for his wife's love and support. But deep inside, he still felt sad. He wanted to give Grace the child she always dreamed of. But now, he wasn't sure it would happen. Over the next few weeks, Grace tried her best to stay cheerful. She continued cooking, cleaning, and supporting her husband. But Chinonso began to change. He became quiet and distant. He spent longer hours at work and didn't talk much when he got home. Grace noticed the change and felt worried. She wanted to help him but didn't know how. One evening, she decided to talk to her friend Adeze again. "Chinonso has been very quiet since we got the doctor's report. I don't know what to do," she said. Adeze listened and smiled kindly. "Give him time, Grace. He feels sad because he thinks he had failed you. Keep showing him love and he will come around." Grace nodded, feeling hopeful. That night, she prepared his favorite meal, pounded yam and egusi soup. When Chinonso came home, he smelled the delicious food and smiled a little. "Thank you, my dear," he said as they sat down to eat. After dinner, Grace held his hand and said softly, "I know you feel sad, but we are in this together. We will find a way. You don't have to carry this burden alone." Chinonso looked at his wife and felt a deep love for her. He realized he had been wrong to stay distant. "Thank you for standing by me. I will do my best to be the husband you deserve," he said, hugging her tightly. Grace and Chinonso continued living together in their quiet home in Asaba. Every morning, Grace woke up, made breakfast, and tried to keep things normal. She always smiled at her husband, hoping to cheer him up. Chinonso tried to act happy, but inside, he felt worried. He loved his wife, but he didn't know how to make things better. One Sunday afternoon, Chinonso's mother, Nneka, called. "Chinonso, my son, how are you and your wife doing?" she asked warmly. Chinonso smiled, hearing his mother's voice. "We are fine, Mama. How is everything at home?" he asked. Nneka laughed softly. "We are well, my son. But Chinonso, it has been years since you got married. When will we hear cry of a baby in your house? We are waiting to carry grandchildren," she said gently. Chinonso's heart sank. He didn't know what to say. He couldn't tell his mother the truth yet. "Mama, please give us more time. Everything will happen when God says it's time," he replied quietly. Nneka sighed. "Okay, my son, but don't forget, children are very important. I will keep praying for you," she said before ending the call. After the call, Chinonso sat quietly. Grace noticed his sad face and asked, "What's wrong, my love?" Chinonso told her about his mother's call. Grace felt sad too, but she tried to stay calm. "Don't worry, Chinonso. We'll be okay," she said softly. A few days later, Nneka came to visit. She arrived with her two daughters, Ifunanya and Amaka. Grace welcomed them warmly. She served them food and drinks, hoping they would enjoy their visit. Nneka smiled at Grace. "Thank you, my daughter. she said kindly. After eating, Nneka looked at Grace and said, Grace, it's been more than 5 years since you married my son. Why haven't you given us a grandchild? We are getting worried. Grace's heart beat fast. She didn't know what to say. She wanted to tell them the truth, but she also wanted to protect her husband. Mama, we are praying. God's time is the best, she said quietly. Ifunanya, Chinonso's younger sister, frowned. Sister Grace, why don't you try visiting some herbalists? Maybe they can help, she suggested. Grace shook her head gently. No, Ifunanya, I believe in God. He will answer us, she said. Amaka, the other sister, looked annoyed. But what if there is something wrong? You can't just sit and do nothing, she said sharply. Grace felt tears in her eyes, but tried to stay strong. Chinonso entered the room just as Amaka was speaking. He noticed the tense atmosphere and asked, What's going on here? Nneka quickly smiled. Nothing serious, my son. We are just talking about the future, she said, trying to hide her concern. That evening, after Nneka and her daughters left, Grace sat quietly. Chinonso noticed her silence and asked, Are you okay? Grace nodded slowly. Your family is worried, Chinonso. They think I am the problem, she said softly. Chinonso felt guilty. He knew he had to protect his wife, but he wasn't ready to tell his family the truth yet. Don't mind them, Grace. You are not alone. I will always stand by you, he said, holding her hand tightly. Days turned into weeks, but the pressure from Chinonso's family didn't stop. Nneka kept calling, asking when they would visit herbalists. Ifunanya and Amaka kept sending messages, suggesting different things Grace could do. Grace felt tired, but she didn't want to give up. One afternoon, Nneka visited again. This time she came alone. She sat with Grace and said, Grace, I know you love my son, and I love you too, but we need children in this family. Please think about visiting a herbalist. It might help. Grace looked at her mother-in-law and felt torn. She didn't want to disrespect Nneka, but she also didn't want to pretend. Mama, I respect you a lot, but I can't visit a herbalist. I believe God will do it for us, she said firmly. Nneka sighed. Okay, my daughter, I just want what's best for you and my son, she said gently before leaving. That night, Grace told Chinonso about the visit. Your mother really wants us to visit herbalists, she said. Chinonso felt angry, but didn't show it. He held Grace close and said, You don't have to do anything you don't believe in. We will be fine. Despite Chinonso's support, Grace began to feel lonely. She didn't tell anyone how much the pressure hurt her. She tried to stay strong, but deep inside, she felt weak. She prayed every night, asking God for strength and peace. One day, as they visited Grace, she noticed her friend looked tired and worried. Grace, you don't look happy. What's wrong? She asked kindly. Grace told Adaeze everything. The pressure from Chinonso's family, her fear, and her sadness. Adaeze listened carefully and said, Grace, you are strong. Don't let anyone make you feel less important. You are a good wife, and God sees your heart. Keep praying and supporting your husband. Grace felt better after talking to Adaeze. She knew she had to stay strong, not just for herself, but also for Chinonso. That evening, she cooked Chinonso's favorite meal and waited for him to come home. When he arrived, she welcomed him with a warm smile. Thank you for standing by me, Grace, Chinonso said as they ate together. Grace smiled softly. We are a team. We will always stand together, she said firmly. One bright morning, Grace woke up feeling hopeful. She wanted to make her home happy again. She prepared yam and fish sauce, something Chinonso liked very much. After breakfast, Chinonso left for his shop, and Grace began cleaning the house. While she worked, her phone rang. It was her sister-in-law Ifunanya. Grace picked up the call. "Hello, Ifunanya," she said kindly. "Grace, why are you so stubborn? Mama has told you many times to visit a herbalist, but you keep refusing. Do you want to remain childless forever?" Ifunanya asked sharply. Grace felt a sharp pain in her chest. She stayed calm and replied Ifunanya, "I trust God. He will give us children when it's time." Ifunanya sighed loudly. "Grace, don't be foolish. You are wasting time. If you can't do what we suggest, maybe you should leave Chinonso. Another woman will come and give us grandchildren." Grace couldn't believe her ears. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't say anything more. She quietly ended the call and sat down, feeling very sad. Later that day, Chinonso came home from work. He noticed Grace wasn't smiling like she usually did. "My love, are you okay? You look worried," he asked. Grace wiped her tears and tried to smile. "I'm fine, Chinonso. It's nothing," she said softly. Chinonso didn't believe her, but decided not to push it. The next day, Nneka came to visit again. She brought Ifunanya and Amaka with her. Grace welcomed them politely and offered them drinks. After a while, Nneka cleared her throat and said, "Grace, we need to talk." Grace sat down listening carefully. Nneka continued, "It's been up to 7 years and we are tired of waiting. We want grandchildren. If you don't want to help us, maybe you should leave so that my son can marry someone who will give him children." Grace's heart broke. She tried to speak, but tears fell down her face. "Mama, I love Chinonso. I will never leave him," she said firmly. Ifunanya stood up angrily. "You are the problem here. You are bringing bad luck to our family. If you truly loved our brother, you would do what we say or leave," she shouted. At that moment, Chinonso walked in. He had returned home early and heard everything. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice filled with anger. Nneka quickly tried to calm him down. "My son, we're only trying to help. We want what's best for you," she said gently. Chinonso looked at her mother, then at his sisters. "Mama, Ifunanya, Amaka, please stop blaming Grace. She's not the problem. Leave my wife alone," he said firmly. Nneka and her daughters looked surprised. They didn't expect Chinonso to defend Grace so strongly. "Chinonso, we are your family. We only want to help," Amaka said softly. "You can help by respecting my wife. Grace is my partner. We will handle our issues without anyone's interference," Chinonso said, holding Grace's hand tightly. Nneka sighed. "Okay, my son, we will leave. But think about what we said," she said as they stood up to leave. Grace remained silent, feeling both relieved and sad. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what Nneka and her daughters had said. "Chinonso, do you think I'm bad luck?" she asked quietly. Chinonso turned to her and held her hands. "Never, Grace. You are my blessing. Don't let their words hurt you. I love you, and that's all that matters," he said gently. Grace felt a little better hearing Chinonso's words. She hugged him tightly and whispered, "Thank you for standing by me." The next morning, Chinonso decided to visit his mother. He wanted to make things clear. When he arrived, Nneka welcomed him warmly. "Chinonso, my son, you came to see me. I'm happy," she said with a smile. "Mama, I came to talk about Grace. Please, stop putting pressure on her. She's a good woman. and I love her. We will find a solution, but we need time, Chinonso said calmly. Nneka sighed deeply. Okay, my son, I only want you to be happy. If you say we should wait, we will wait, she said softly. When Chinonso returned home, she told Grace what happened. Grace felt relieved, but deep inside, she still felt worried. She knew Chinonso's family would not give up easily. Days turned into weeks, but things did not change much. Nneka and her daughters stopped visiting, but they still called Chinonso often, asking about children. Grace tried to stay strong, but the constant pressure made her feel weak. One evening, Adaeze came to visit. She noticed Grace looked tired and sad. Grace, you don't look happy. What's going on? Adaeze asked kindly. Grace told Adaeze everything. The pressure from Chinonso's family, the harsh words, and how she felt. Adaeze listened carefully and said, Grace, you are strong. Don't let their words bring you down. Keep loving your husband and everything would be fine. Grace smiled a little. Thank you, Ada, my friend. Your words always make me feel better, she said softly. That night, Grace prayed quietly before going to bed. She asked God for strength, peace, and wisdom. She knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she promised herself she wouldn't give up. One sunny morning, Grace woke up feeling tired. She had not slept well. Her heart felt heavy because of everything going on. She went to the kitchen to make breakfast. As she cooked, tears rolled down her cheeks. She tried to stop crying, but the pain was too much. After a while, Chinonso entered the kitchen. He noticed her red eyes. Grace, have you been crying again? He asked gently. Grace wiped her face quickly and shook her head. No, I'm fine, she said, forcing a smile. Chinonso knew his wife wasn't happy. He hated seeing her sad, but he didn't know how to make things better. He hugged her tightly and whispered, Please don't cry. We will get through this together. That afternoon, Grace decided to take a walk. She needed fresh air to clear her mind. As she walked down the street, she thought about everything that had happened. The pressure from Chinonso's family, the hurtful words, and the constant questions about children weighed heavily on her heart. While walking, Grace saw Adaeze coming from the market. Grace, you look worried. Is everything okay? Adaeze asked kindly. Grace shook her head and replied, I'm just tired, Adaeze. I don't know how much more I can take. Adaeze held Grace's hand. Don't give up, Grace. You are strong. Remember, you're not alone. Chinonso loves you, and you have friends who care about you, she said. Grace smiled a little. Adaeze's words always made her feel better. They talked for a while before Grace went home. She felt a bit lighter after the walk, but deep inside, she still felt sad. Later that evening, Nneka called again. This time, she didn't speak kindly. Grace, why are you refusing to visit the herbalist? Do you want my son to remain without children forever? She asked sharply. Grace tried to calm her down. Mama, I have told you before. I believe God will bless us with children at the right time, she replied softly. Nneka sighed loudly. If you don't want to help, maybe you should leave my son. We need a woman who can give us grandchildren, she said angrily before ending the call. Grace sat down, feeling broken. She couldn't hold back the tears anymore. She cried quietly, thinking about what Nneka had said. She loved Chinonso deeply, but the constant pressure was becoming too much for her. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about leaving. Maybe if I leave, Chinonso's family will stop blaming me, she thought sadly. She didn't want to leave her husband, but she also didn't want to keep facing this pain. The next morning, Grace packed a small bag. She didn't want to cause more problems. She planned to stay with Adeze for a while. Before leaving, she wrote a note for Chinonso. The note said, I love you, but I need some time alone. I'll be safe with Adeze. When Chinonso came home from work, he saw the note. His heart sank. He couldn't believe Grace had left. He quickly grabbed his phone and called Adeze. Adeze, is Grace with you? He asked anxiously. Yes, she's here, Adeze replied. She said she needed some time to think. Chinonso felt relieved knowing Grace was safe. He went to Adeze's house immediately. When he arrived, he saw Grace sitting quietly. He walked up to her and knelt down. Grace, please come home. I can't live without you, he said softly. Grace looked at her husband with tears in her eyes. Chinonso, I love you, but your family keeps hurting me. I don't know how much more I can take, she said. Chinonso held her hands tightly. I am so sorry, Grace. I will protect you from now on. Please don't leave me, he begged. Adeze, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Grace, you and Chinonso love each other. Don't let anyone break your bond. Stay strong and fight for your marriage. Grace thought about Adeze's words. She knew living wouldn't solve the problem. She loved Chinonso too much to give up. After a while, she nodded slowly. Okay, I'll come home, she said. Chinonso felt a wave of relief. He hugged his wife tightly and whispered, Thank you, my love. I promise things will get better. That night, back at home, Grace and Chinonso talked for a long time. They shared their fears, hopes, and dreams. Chinonso promised to stand by Grace and protect her from any more hurtful words. The next morning, Chinonso decided to visit his mother again. He wanted to make things clear once and for all. When he arrived, Nneka was surprised to see him. Chinonso, my son, you didn't tell me you were coming, she said warmly. Mama, I came to talk about Grace. Please, stop blaming her. She's not the reason we don't have children. You are hurting her, and I can't allow that anymore, Chinonso said firmly. Nneka looked at her son with surprise. She didn't expect him to speak so strongly. But Chinonso, we only want what's best for you, she said quietly. I understand, Mama, but hurting Grace is not the way to help. She's my wife, and I love her. Please respect her, Chinonso said. Nneka sighed deeply. Okay, my son, if you say so, we will stop, she said reluctantly. When Chinonso returned home, he told Grace about what happened. Grace felt relieved, but she knew it might take time for things to change completely. She hugged her husband tightly and said thank you for standing by me. One quiet evening, Grace sat with Chinonso after dinner. They both enjoyed the cool breeze coming through the window. Chinonso held Grace's hand tightly and said, Thank you for staying. You are my strength. Grace smiled softly. I love you, Chinonso. Together, we can face anything, she replied. Days passed peacefully until one afternoon when Nneka, Ifunanya, and Amaka visited again. Grace welcomed them politely, offering them cold drinks and snacks. Nneka looked at Grace and said, Grace, you are a good wife, but we still don't understand why we have no grandchildren yet. Grace felt uneasy but remained calm. Mama, only God can give children. We are praying, she replied quietly. Ifunanya frowned. Sister Grace, we have waited long enough. Maybe it's time for Chinonso to marry another woman who can give us children, she said harshly. Grace's heart sank. She tried to hold back her tears. Before she could respond, Chinonso entered the room. He had returned early from work and heard what Ifunanya said. Enough, Chinonso said firmly, his voice filled with anger. Everyone turned to look at him in surprise. He stood in front of his family, looking at each of them. Stop blaming Grace. She's not the reason we have no children. Nneka looked confused. What do you mean, my son? she asked gently. Chinonso took a deep breath and continued. We went to the hospital. The doctor said Grace is fine. The problem is with me. I cannot father a child naturally. The room fell silent. Nneka, Ifunanya and Amaka stared at Chinonso, shocked. They didn't know what to say. Grace felt both sad and relieved. Finally, the truth was out. After a few moments, Nneka spoke softly. Chinonso, why didn't you tell us earlier? Why? Why? Why didn't you let us know? She said, her eyes filled with regret. I didn't tell you because I was ashamed. I didn't want anyone to blame me. But I can't watch you hurt Grace anymore. She has been nothing but kind and loving. She stayed with me even after knowing the truth, Chinonso said firmly. Amaka looked at Grace with tears in her eyes. Sister Grace, we are sorry. We didn't mean to hurt you. Please forgive us, she said sincerely. Ifunanya nodded. Yes, please forgive us. We didn't know the full story. We spoke out of ignorance, she added. Grace looked at them and felt a deep sense of relief. She knew their words had hurt her, but now they understood the truth. I forgive you all. Let's put this behind us and move forward, she said kindly. Nneka stood up, hugged Grace tightly. Thank you, my daughter. You're truly a good wife. We will support you and Chinonso from now on, she said warmly. That evening, after Nneka and her daughters left, Chinonso and Grace sat together, feeling lighter. I'm proud of you, Chinonso. It wasn't easy, but you did the right thing, Grace said softly. Chinonso smiled and hugged his wife. I feel free now. Thank you for always standing by me, he said. From that day, things began to change. Nneka and her daughters became kinder to Grace. They no longer pressured her about children. Instead, they visited often, bringing gifts and spending time with the couple. One day, Chinonso suggested something to Grace. What do you think about adopting a child? We may not have one naturally, but we can still be parents, he said thoughtfully. Grace smiled brightly. I think it's a wonderful idea. Let's give a child a home filled with love, she replied. They both agreed to start the adoption process. It wasn't easy, but they were determined. Together, they faced each challenge with hope and love. Grace and Chinonso woke up feeling happy. The house felt calm and the love filled the air. They were excited about the idea of adopting a child. Grace cooked a delicious breakfast of fried plantain and eggs. They sat together, eating and laughing. Later that day, Nneka came to visit. She brought a basket full of fruits. Good afternoon, my children, she greeted warmly. Good afternoon, Mama, Chinonso and Grace replied together, smiling. Nneka sat down and looked at Grace with soft eyes. Grace, I came today to say I am truly sorry for everything. We treated you badly, and it was wrong. Please forgive me, she said sincerely. Grace felt touched by Nneka's words. She smiled kindly and said, Mama, I forgive you already. Let's forget the past and move forward. Nneka sighed in relief. Thank you, my daughter. You have a good heart, she said, holding Grace's hand warmly. Just then, Ifunanya and Amaka arrived. They brought a large bowl of soup and a basket of yams. Sister Grace, we also want to say sorry for everything. We were wrong, and we feel bad for hurting you, Ifunanya said with tears in her eyes. Yes, we didn't understand before. Now we know better. Please forgive us, Amaka added softly. Grace smiled at them. She stood up and hugged both sisters tightly. I forgive you. Let's all be one happy family again, she said. Chinonso watched his wife with pride. He felt lucky to have someone so kind and forgiving. Thank you, Grace. You are truly special, he said softly. The family sat together, talking and laughing. They ate the delicious soup Ifnaya and Amaka brought. Everyone felt happy and peaceful. It was a day filled with love and forgiveness. A few weeks later, Grace and Chinonso went to meet an adoption officer. They wanted to learn more about the process. The officer welcomed them warmly and explained everything they needed to do. It will take some time, but if you stay patient, you will soon have a child, she said with a smile. Grace and Chinonso left the office feeling hopeful. They knew the journey wouldn't be easy, but they were ready. I can't wait to hold our child in my arms, Grace said, smiling brightly. I feel the same, Grace. We will be great parents, Chinonso replied, holding her hand tightly. Back at home, Nneka called to check on them. How did it go? She asked eagerly. It went well, Mama. We are starting the process soon, Chinonso replied. Good news, my son. I am happy for you both. If you need anything, let me know, Nneka said warmly. Grace felt grateful for the change in Nneka, her mother-in-law. She no longer felt alone. Now she had a family that supported her. One evening, Adeze came to visit. She brought a small gift for Grace. This is for the child you will soon have, she said with a big smile. Grace hugged her friend tightly. Thank you, Adeze. You have always been there for me, she said softly. As days turned into weeks, Grace and Chinonso worked on their home. They painted the walls, bought toys, and prepared a small room for the child. They wanted everything to be perfect. One afternoon, Chinonso received a call from the adoption officer. We have good news. Please come tomorrow, the officer said. Chinonso quickly told Grace. They were both excited. Grace, tomorrow might be the day we meet our child, he said happily. I can't wait, Chinonso. This is the best news ever, Grace replied, her eyes shining with joy. That night, they couldn't sleep. They stayed up, talking about their future as parents. We will give this child all the love in the world, Chinonso said softly. Yes, we will be the best parents, Grace added with a smile. The next morning, Grace woke up feeling hopeful. She had been through so much, but today felt different. She smiled as she stretched her arms, got out of bed. Chinonso was already awake, reading a newspaper in the sitting room. Good morning, my love. Good morning, baby, Chinonso replied with a smile. Did you sleep well? Yes, I did, Grace answered, heading to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. She made toast and scrambled eggs, adding some tea for both of them. They sat together at the dining table, enjoying their meal quietly. After eating, Chinonso held Grace's hand. Thank you for staying strong. I know it hadn't been easy, but you never gave up, he said warmly. Grace smiled. I stayed because I love you. We faced challenges, but our love kept us together, she said softly. Later that day, they went to the adoption office. They had completed all the requirements and were ready to meet the child who would become part of their family. Grace felt both excited and nervous. Chinonso held her hand tightly, giving her silent support. At the office, the adoption officer welcomed them warmly. Mr. and Mrs. Chinonso, we are happy to tell you that everything is ready. Today you will meet your child, she said with a big smile. Grace's heart raced with joy. She couldn't wait to hold the child in her arms. The officer led them to a small playroom where a little boy sat quietly, playing with toys. He looked up as they entered. He was about 3 years old, with bright eyes and a curious expression. "Hello, Chigozie," the officer said kindly. "This is Grace and Chinonso. They are here to take you home." Grace knelt down and smiled at the boy. "Hello, Chigozie. I am Grace, and this is Chinonso. We are happy to meet you," she said softly. Chigozie looked at them for a moment, then smiled shyly. He walked over to Grace and held her hand. Grace felt tears in her eyes. At that moment, she knew everything they had been through was worth it. Chinonso bent down and touched Chigozie's head gently. "We will love you, Chigozie. You are now our son," he said warmly. The officer smiled at the touching scene. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Chinonso. You are now parents," she said happily. On their way home, Grace couldn't stop looking at Chigozie. He sat quietly in the back seat, holding a small teddy bear. Chinonso smiled as he drove. "We finally have our child, Grace. This is the start of something beautiful," he said. "Yes, Chinonso, our family is complete," Grace replied, her heart filled with joy. When they got home, Grace showed Chigozie his room. It was painted in bright colors, with toys neatly arranged on the shelves. Chigozie looked around, his eyes wide with wonder. "This is your room, Chigozie. We hope you like it," Grace said kindly. Chigozie nodded and hugged the teddy bear tightly. He climbed onto the small bed and smiled at Grace. "Thank you," he said softly. Grace felt tears in her eyes again. She hugged Chigozie tightly, feeling grateful for this moment. Chinonso watched them with a big smile. He felt proud of his wife and excited about their future. Over the next few weeks, Grace and Chinonso adjusted to life as parents. They took Chigozie to the park, read him bedtime stories, and made sure he felt loved. Nneka, Ifunanya, and Amaka visited often, bringing gifts for the little boy. They all adored Chigozie and showered him with love. One Sunday afternoon, Nneka came over with a basket of fruits. She sat down and watched Chigozie play with his toys. "Grace, thank you for forgiving us. You have shown us what true love means," she said sincerely. Grace smiled. "Mama, love is about staying together through hard times. I am happy we are now one big family," she replied. That evening, Chinonso and Grace sat outside, watching the sunset. Chigozie played nearby, laughing as he chased a small ball. "Look at him, Chinonso. He is so happy," Grace said with a smile. "Yes, Grace. Our home is now filled with joy. This is what we prayed for," Chinonso replied, holding her hand. As night fell, they went inside and prepared dinner. After eating, Grace tucked Chigozie into bed. She read him a short story about a brave lion, and soon he fell asleep. She kissed his forehead gently and whispered, "Good night, my son." When Grace returned to the sitting room, she found Chinonso waiting for her. He handed her a small wrapped box. "What is this?" Grace asked, surprised. "Open it and see," Chinonso said with a smile. Grace opened the box and found a beautiful necklace with a small heart-shaped pendant. "It's lovely, Chinonso. Thank you," she said, touched by the thoughtful gift. "I wanted to give you something special to say thank you. You stood by me through everything." "I will always love you, Grace," Chinonso said softly. Grace smiled and hugged her husband tightly. "I love you too, Chinonso. We have come a long way, and now we have a new beginning." Together, they sat quietly, feeling grateful for their journey. They had faced many trials, but love, patience, and forgiveness had brought them to this beautiful place. Their story was not just about pain, it was about hope, courage, and the power of staying together through life storms. As they watched Chigozie sleep peacefully, they knew their family's future was bright. They had each other, and that was all they needed. The story teaches us that true love is not about giving up when things become hard. Grace stayed with her husband even when people blamed her. Chinonso showed courage by standing up for his wife. It reminds us that family is built on love, understanding, and forgiveness. Life may bring challenges, but with patience and support, we can overcome anything. Never let pressure from others destroy what you've built with love. And with that, my dear friends, our story comes to a close. But remember, the magic of storytelling lives on, waiting to whisk us away on new adventures, where the wonders of imagination know no bounds. Goodbye for now, and may your dreams be filled with joy, wonder, and endless possibility. Thank you so much for watching. Please kindly comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting stories. I also want to use this opportunity to say something important as we start this new year. Life is full of ups and downs. Sometimes things go well and we are happy. Other times things don't go as we planned and we feel so sad. But no matter what happens, we should always keep trying, keep believing, and never give up. This new year is a chance for us to start fresh, to be better, and to grow stronger. Let us choose to be kind to others, to love more, and to help those in need. Even when life gets hard, remember that every problem has a solution and every bad day will pass. Thank you for always supporting me and listening to my stories. It means a lot to me, and I hope my stories make you happy, teach you something new, or give you hope when you need it. Let's make this year a time to dream big, work hard, and stay hopeful. I pray that this year brings you joy, peace, good health, and many blessings. Happy New Year, and thank you for being part of my journey. With love, Amakas Folktales. I always love you guys. Stay blessed. Thank you.